Sacred Sites with Steve Ray. Here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
Yes, welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey, and today's edition of Sacred Sites with Steve Ray is one for the books. But hey, without further ado, Steve, take it away.
Good morning, Keith. Steve Ray here from CatholicConvert.com, and I'm always happy to join you to share about our pilgrimages and the places we visited and the biblical Catholic sites. And last time I spoke with you, I was in Rome, and I was telling you about our experiences there. But I kind of left you with a cliffhanger about how my wife and I had a miracle related to John Paul II. And it started out this way. My wife and I, as we became Catholics in 1994, by the way, that was 31 years ago, Pentecost, so we just recently celebrated that. We came in on Pentecost Sunday, 1994, 31 years ago. John Paul II was the Pope. We loved him. He was a clear thinker. He was a good teacher, charismatic, and what a wonderful Pope to have on the chair of St. Peter when we came into the church that time. And when we became Catholic, my wife has a great desire to pray for priests. She's always loved to pray for priests and seminarians. And in fact, she was praying one time, and it seemed like that the Lord wanted us to have a priest, to raise a priest. But I'm getting ahead of the story a little bit. Some friends of ours, a deacon, his name's Deacon Dan, and his wife had a daughter, and 24 years later, they still had no other children. And they were at the Vatican, and he was giving talks. And at one point, John Paul II was going down a long hallway, and there was people on both sides, and he was going up for a talk that he was going to give for a meeting. And he just walked down the aisle, but he stopped, and he turned back around, and he came back and put his hand on the deacon's wife's head, and he prayed for her. And she had no idea why he did that. He didn't pray for anyone else. And after that, he turned around and then he continued on the process. She thought that was very strange that he had prayed for her that way. And when she got home, she's older, of course. She was feeling funny. And she asked her friends what menopause felt like. And they told her, but it wasn't menopause. She was actually pregnant. 24 years since her first child, and then 24 years of no children. She was pregnant. And we jokingly said that the Pope got her pregnant in Rome, of course, because he prayed for her. But all seriousness. So my wife said, you know what? Steve and I are older. I would like to raise up a priest. If God can do it for her, why can't I have a priest even though I'm older? And I could raise up a priest for Jesus and to be a priest in the church. So she started to pray for that. And we were probably in our late 40s, early 50s at this time. And then one day when we were in Rome with our family, it was the Jubilee Year 2000. We were in Rome with our family. And she said, I have to get the Pope to pray for me. She said, Steve, let's see if we can get to meet John Paul II so he can pray for me like he did for the deacon's wife. And I said, okay, so we set faxes back in the days. Remember what a fax was? Most people don't even remember anymore. But we'd send a fax to Bishop Jivitz, who was Pope John Paul II's secretary, administrator. And every day we'd get an answer back, non possible, busy Jubilee year, cannot do it, so on. So we said, oh, okay, but then I'd do it the next day. And then I went to the papal palace there, and I left a note with the Swiss guard, and I said, please give this to Bishop Jivitz. Well, we did this every day. Persistence pays off, because the last day that we were in Rome, the next day we're going to fly home. That evening, I got a fax from Bishop Jivitz, and it said, be at the bronze door at 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, we couldn't believe it. So we rushed over there. Now, I don't have suits and ties. I don't even own a suit tie, I don't think. And so I had to go find a friend. He ran me down to a clothing store, and they got me a suit at the last minute right before they closed, and they sized me up. But you know, you have to have it tailored for the sleeves and the pant legs on. And my wife spent a couple hours at night with straight pins, pinning it all up, measuring. If John Paul II would have looked carefully, he would have seen pins everywhere holding my clothes, the hems up. So we went to that mass. It was a private mass. We got there at 7 o'clock. in the morning. John Paul II was up in the chapel praying. The Swiss Guard took us up the big steps through the bronze door into the papal palace. Now, that sounds very opulent, but it's really very plain and common. That's where the popes live. And they took us into the chapel, and there was John Paul II already praying. He was there kneeling on a kneeler, facing the altar and the tabernacle, and you could tell he was deep in prayer as we all entered. He still had slippers on. And I was realizing that he's such an old man, he could fall right over, and yet at the same time, he's the most powerful man in the world. Nobody has a moral voice like he does. He has the keys of the kingdom of God in his hand. So what a dichotomy, the weak little old man he was, and yet the powerful man that's sitting on the chair of St. Peter. So we had Mass with him we were right in the front row. And then after the Mass, they bring us into a little room and we get to meet him. And he takes a few moments to talk to each person. We're in a line. We're kind of in a row there. And I had my book, Crossing the Tiber. I wanted to show him that book. You can see here is a picture of me meeting the Pope that morning. Now, I was overwhelmed with emotion. Two things can get me to cry very easy: the Lord and the church and my family. Those two things I get very emotional about. And ever since becoming a Catholic, I've become much more emotional about those things, the reality of it all. But as he came down the aisle, and he was giving everybody these rosaries, by the way, and this is the rosary that John Paul II gave us. There's his papal emblem on there. My wife and I have two each because we were able to meet him twice. But he came down the aisle to talk to us, and when he came to me, I started to bawl. I didn't get a word out. I actually started to cry when he was two people from me. I was just so overwhelmed. I could sense the holiness of this man. No surprise to me that he's canonized, because I could sense it with that man as soon as he walked in the room. I just burst into tears. I didn't say a word. I gave him my book, Crossing the Tiber. I signed it to him, and I said, "Oh, this is for you." But anyway, my wife she kept her composure, and she got down on her knees and she said, "Holy Father, I want you to pray for me to raise up a priest." Now, I'm going to step back a little bit. When she had prayed that she wanted a priest, we had told our priest in Ann Arbor here, and Janet was on the telephone with him, and our son was overhearing him tell the priest that she wanted to raise up a son, and maybe it would be Jesse. We have one son and three daughters. Maybe it would be Jesse. Jesse wrote on the computer, "Read my lips, Mom." No, not me. So we knew it wasn't going to be Jesse. So when we were there with the Pope, Janet fell on her knees in front of him, as you can see here, and she says, "Holy Father, please pray for me. I want to raise up a priest." And he said, What? He didn't understand her. So she said, "I want to raise a priest." And look at him. He has his hands on her face. He prayed for her for 30 seconds or more. And it was a very overwhelming moment. So Janet said, "Oh, I'm going to have a baby. I'm going to have a boy. He's going to be a priest. We're going to raise a priest." She was all excited. Just like the deacon's wife, I'm going to get pregnant from the Pope's prayers. And we got home, but nothing happened. And for several years, there was no baby came. Our 4 kids were already well grown. And at that time, and probably we were now in our 50s, late 50s. So we figured, well, maybe God was going to use our ministry of the movies and the books and the conferences to help young men want to become priests. And we've had, one time these 3 Benedictine young priests came and said it was your movies that inspired us to want to be priests. And it was just, Janet says, well, that was probably what the Lord meant when I felt his nudging me in prayer. But then we were going to Guam, and she had a dream. This was several years later. I'm late 50s already. She too. And she had a dream. Before we were going to Guam, we were going to be there for a week doing conferences all over the island of Guam and then go to the Philippines. And she said she had this dream in the middle of the night that she was pregnant. And she said, "Oh, I couldn't be pregnant. I'm too old now." And she got a pregnancy test from before, and she took the test at 2:00 in the morning after her dream, and she found out she was pregnant. She woke me up and she said, Steve, look at this." And I said, "What is it?" I was still half asleep. "What is it?" She said, "Look." And I looked and it said positive. I said, "You're pregnant?" And she said, "Yes." I said, well, she said, what do you think? I said, I'm terrified. We're flying all over the world making movies and starting pilgrimages and all of this. How can we have a baby? But then by the time the night came around, I was on Catholic Answers Live, and I said, I want to announce that we're having a baby. We're going to have a priest. And I'm so excited about it. Now, at our age, the doctor told us there's a 70% chance of a miscarriage because of your age and the depletion of hormone levels and so on. And so we said, well, she took the hormones, did everything we could, but we did lose the baby. We had a miscarriage. But when the doctor checked her at the age of the baby and the size of the baby, he told us something that just blew our minds. He said that we conceived on the day that John Paul II died. Can you believe that? On the day that he died, the doctor, without knowing that, dated the conception of that baby. We're going to call him JJ, John Joseph. It was the day that he died. So we're convinced that one of the first things John Paul II did when he got to heaven was prayed for us to have a baby. And even though we lost that baby, we know that when we get to heaven, we're going to have a little JJ Ray. He's going to be a little priest up in heaven, and he's going to come up and say, Mom and Dad, thank you for giving me life. That's our story of John Paul II and the miraculous answer to his prayer when he got up to heaven. Thanks for listening. God bless you.